ladies and gentlemen, hello there and welcome to our L24 special coverage of the Ukraine-Russia war, the so-called special military operation. A senior Pentagon official said Tuesday that the United States will not compel Ukraine to accept a ceasefire, even as casualties mount on each side as Russia makes incremental gains in Ukraine's east. On the other hand, Dmitry Medvedev, a long-term ally of Vladimir Putin, who is currently deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia, has posted this morning to Telegram a message which gives some insight into the current state of senior-level Russian thinking about the situation in Ukraine. In the message, Medvedev questions a Ukrainian request that it receive energy imports this winter with an option to delay payment for 2 years. Medvedev says, just a question, who said that in 2 years Ukraine will even exist on the world map? A question raised the attention of a survey that was made between the 9 EU member states, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Spain and Sweden. Plus, the UK found support for Ukraine remained high, but those preoccupations have shifted to the conflict's wider impacts. The survey found that despite strong support across Europe for Ukraine's bid to join the EU and the West's policy of cutting ties with Moscow, many voters in Europe want the war to end as soon as possible, even if it means Ukraine losing territory. To analyze all this information, I'm joined live by Skype platform by Christian, a professor of political sciences from France, and Mr. Upamanyu Basu from India, assistant professor of political science. Gentlemen, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to this debate. The discussion begins right after this break. And before we delve into our discussion, let's tackle this report that last bridge connecting Severodonetsk to Lysychansk was blown up, trapping hundreds of civilians. The two cities are now focus of a fierce battle between Russia and Ukraine for control of the Donbas industrial region in the east.
Developments in the city of Severodonetsk are accelerating in favor of the Russian army, with Ukraine declaring its fear that Moscow will mobilize all its forces, starting from Tuesday, to occupy the city in Donbas. Zelensky admitted incurring heavy losses and stressed that the defense of the Donbas will give an indication of who will dominate the region.
We have losses, unfortunately, and they are painful. We have to hold on. This is our state. It is vital to stay in the Donbass. The more the enemy suffers losses there, the less strength he will have to continue the defense of the region is essential to give an indication of who will dominate in the weeks to come.
In turn, the Russian Defense Ministry revealed that it offered Ukrainian fighters sheltering at the Azot chemical plant in the town of Severodonetsk, eastern Ukraine, the opportunity to surrender. In addition, the ministry announced the opening of a humanitarian corridor for civilians trapped in Donbas, as the last bridge that connects Severodonetsk with neighboring Lysychansk has been destroyed by Ukraine to reduce the pace of Russian attack, according to Moscow. Both cities are at the heart of the battle for Ukraine's Donbas region.
Waiting Mr. Christian to join this debate. We'll be starting with you, Mr. Basu. After Russian troops withdrawn from Kiev and put the main focus of the military operation on the eastern part of Ukraine, precisely the Donbas region, do you think now Ukraine could sustain and resist even more this Russian concentration of the Donbas, or it is lost and will become a Russian land, especially when residents of Donetsk and Lugansk choose to join Russia for good? And some of them, they have been even given Russian passports.
Yeah, right. Thank you for that question. I think this has been like a very drastic culture, even in the academic field and also from a lot of US-led policy tanks as well, that they have not really produced significant research or any kind of reports on why these regions are like so pro-Russia and what is the like the cultural and the social reasons behind it. So evidently, when there is a full-fledged attack or from the eastern sides, the clear answer is that you can delay it. Obviously, the kind of attack that is happening, you can obviously delay it, but it is inevitable at this point of time, right now, that that particular, like especially the Donbas region, will be under Russian rule. I think from my analysis, it will be like next 2-3 months will be very difficult. And the kind of attacks that is happening, like already Russian forces has like cut off bridges to kind of access these spaces, and it will be very difficult for to like wherever like even like as you pointed out that the passports have also been like the people are pro-Russia in these kind of areas, and there is like very little research on why their affiliations are towards Russia. So it will be very difficult to sustain autonomy at this point of time, though I understand that right now it's a war of identity between Ukraine and Russia, and Russia won't back down very like not in the recent future.
Quite understood. Staying with you, Mr. Basu, just in your interpretation as an associate professor within the field of political science, what is your reading between Russia and Ukraine? How this war, the so-called military operation, will reach an end?
Not like it won't reach an end until there is negotiation from both the sides. Like even from an academic point of view, like there are a lot of theories to analyze it, but obviously there are ground realities are very different, and it's very difficult, like honestly, to sit here and analyze it. But obviously, like if you look at the stats of it, most of the like sanctions right now, people think that the sanctions will obviously help in reaching an end. But if you look at the attitudinal shifts in the policies of Russia, even the sanctions are not really affecting its attack or its invasion in Ukraine. So it's very clear that just having sanctions will not be a solution. And this solution won't even happen even if the NATO allies have a very aggressive attack on Russia. It has to be a negotiation when both of these countries, Ukraine and Russia, reach a saturation point. And right now, the saturation point is very far as Russia is concerned. So unfortunately, it will still like be a more 100 days, unfortunately.
Based on your words, sanctions are not really helpful. Do you think that, I believe that this sanctions policy is kind of a suicidal policy that I have heard from one of my guests. It harms European countries more than Russia itself. So is it really helpful for a long term, or now it should change this idea of sanctions and go back for negotiations?
Right. This is again a very important question because a lot of the policy analysts in our field also have suggested that sanctions work. Sanctions can only work where like there are clear alternatives to it. I think even in the last show, last report, we also mentioned that the clear alternatives are very less here. Like, for example, even if I assume that we find like a 50% alternative to Russian oil, where is the other 50% coming from? So even if we find like Saudi Arabia and Middle Eastern countries agreeing to supply massive amounts of frets to European countries, where is the other 50% will come from? So there will always be, even if we try, even if the European country, EU tries a lot to find alternatives, it won't be equivalent. It won't solve the vacuum that will be created. So it will always obviously affect the Russian oil prices. Even right now, the Asian countries like India, they have significantly increased their dependence on Russian oil. So you understand that there are a lot of countries who are also benefiting from this, not like politically, but obviously there is an economic answer to it. So
Quite
it
understood.
won't channel it. Yeah.
Quite understood. Thank you so much for this clarification. Now moving on to the second point. Secretary General of NATO Jens Stoltenberg says that Western countries should send more heavy weapons to Kiev to help it fight the Russian army that is advancing in the eastern of Ukraine.
Yes, Ukraine should have more heavy weapons, and NATO allies and partners have provided heavy weapons now for actually a long time, but they're also stepping up. There will be a meeting tomorrow at the NATO headquarters in the contact group for support to Ukraine.
Mr. Basso, coming back to you, how can you explain the NATO moves and the new applications of the Scandinavian countries in this precise time where the situation is intense in the ground of the battlefield as well as within the diplomatic efforts?
Yeah, I think this is clearly understandable from the point of view of security dilemma like situation that is created. Like we always used to understand security dilemma from other regions, but in Europe right now, it's the perfect example because you have like there is a creation of this paranoia kind of a state, which is dividing the entire Europe into two fields. Like there are countries in within European Union as well who has considerably called out the sanction kind of a policy. Like for example, Hungary, for example, the kind of right-wing political parties that are active in Hungary, they have clearly called on record that this kind of sanctions will hurt their economy. So eventually, like a lot of countries, as you rightly pointed out, are going and filing their applications towards NATO, and it will create a competition-like situation, which will obviously affect the entire politics and the kind of stability that European Union was famous for.
Mr. Basso, don't you think that the main target and the main goal of this military operation by Russia on Ukrainian lands is just to stop NATO expansion eastward Europe? But at the same time now, Scandinavian countries such as Sweden, Finland are joining this alliance. Do you think that Russia has failed to reach the main goal?
No, I think Russia's maximum failure has been to underestimate Ukraine. That was the first failure. Apart from that's a very long shot that it is just the idea was just to stop NATO's increasing influence in that particular region. Russia had always had a identity-based problem with Ukraine as well. So it is not just about hard politics here. There is a softer line as well, which is like less research, but it is a significant. The societal influences in Ukraine has always been underplayed. Coming to your next point, it is very important to understand Russia's growth in these areas. Like, for example, the eastern areas, as I was reflecting on in the earlier questions, is that we have significantly not given importance to why the eastern areas have been pro-Russia for a very long time. So I think like it answers like two of these questions, but it is very difficult to analyze them in a very like homogeneous way.
Quite understood. Now, moving on to another point to be discussed. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen claimed during a briefing in Kiev with the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky that the Commission is working day and night on an assessment of Ukraine's eligibility as a possible candidate for EU membership. Also, the Ukrainian President emphasized on the necessity of integrating Ukraine into the EU, describing the conflict as just a first stage in Moscow's plan to divide Europe and weaken it.
Ukraine is the first stage of this aggression in these plans. That's why the European Union's positive response to Ukraine's application for membership can be a positive response to the question of whether the European project has a future at all.
And now I'm joined by Mr. Singh from South Korea. Mr. Singh, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Singh, as a direct question, what role Francis Macron is playing in this battle between Russia and Ukraine? I mean, in the very beginning, Macron tried politics and negotiation, yet he didn't succeed. After that, his country joined the deliveries of weapons to Ukraine. And at the same time, he said that the Russians should not be humiliated after this battle came to an end. So how can you explain this sort of contradiction?
I think, France is in a very difficult situation. They don't know what actually to do. They don't want to spoil their relationship with Ukraine because France is traditionally aligned with Russia very much. So I think they want to keep the Europe happy as well as Russia happy. But I don't think too much damage has been done. I think the middle path is not possible. But Europe is trying, Macron is trying his best to keep balance between two blocks which are merging in the war. But I think the situation is sliding to the bust. I think time is over now when countries like France can play a middle role.
Sorry to add this, Mr. Singh. Macron said it will take decades for Ukraine to join the EU. At the same time, France and all the EU countries are helping Ukraine. But they still refuse its membership within the European Union as well as within the NATO. I mean, what Ukraine should provide to be accepted in this letter?
Want Ukraine in the NATO, but Ukraine is not itself is not ready. Too much responsibility. Ukraine is in the middle of the war. Ukraine is not ready. If they include NATO, include Ukraine in NATO now, then it means NATO will win the war against Russia. That's not an easy part of the story. So no matter how much they wish Ukraine to be part of NATO, but it's not technically possible because it's a long procedure of joining NATO is more than 1 year long procedure. So no matter how much they want, they cannot help NATO immediately. I think there's so much procedural problems in joining NATO.
Quite understood. Mr. Basso, coming back to you, it seems that now we have a different kind of confrontation. It's all about long-range missiles and the new system weapons. So if Ukraine could have the availability of these weapons, as the Ukrainian president is still pleading for more weapons, would that help Ukraine to win against Russia, or it will only buy them a little time? In other words, to prolong this operation as Putin claimed?
Yeah, it's like a prolonging strategy. That's why the calls are very desperate at this point of time. Like USA has called on record that they will be supporting like $4.6 billion worth of military support. But most of it depends on the timing of it. Like right now, as you rightly said, that half like the eastern side is already gone. Like we are just counting days. So we can obviously count a larger number of days, but here we are talking about sizes of these militaries. So what kind of support Ukraine will get? It is like it's hearsay right now. It's very difficult to calculate it in numbers. So it is just an elongation. It's not that helpful. Substantial, not very substantial.
Quite understood. The foreign now to a different topic. The Foreign Ministry of Russia said on Tuesday that many British journalists, British media representatives, and defense figures have been banned from entering Russia as a response by Moscow to Western sanctions for spreading misinformation about Russia. Mr. Singh, Europe's unity over this war in Ukraine is at risk, as public attention increasingly shifted from battlefield to cost of living concerns. Polling across 10 European countries suggests with divide deepening between voters who want a swift end to the conflict and those who want Russia to be punished. So, what is your main reading over this conflict between the European countries, this division?
Naturally, Russia is basically, as you know, European country. It's not easy to throw Russia out of Europe, no matter how much they try. So it's a very complicated process, So this bar itself is wrong, This bar should not have happened. European countries should have tried their best to stop the bar. Now it's too late. It's very difficult to stop the bar. It's very difficult to bring peace, So they don't know basically what to do, Basically, Russia is a European country, and to throw Russia out of Europe is almost unthinkable, I think it cannot happen. So they have to find a solution. Now they themselves don't know. They'll try to defeat Russia militarily, but I think it's not going to happen anytime soon. So they're in a very tricky situation. No matter how much they try to supply arms to Ukraine, Russia cannot defeat it militarily for the short term, So they have to, but no matter, they're not making a peace effort. So they have not realized the mistake they have made. They should not let the war happen in the first place. But the first mistake has been made. Second mistake they are making now by arming Ukraine. Russia cannot be defeated militarily in short term. If you really want to defeat Russia militarily, you have to throw the full weight behind the bar. With that, you are saying that Europe cannot do, because there's a bigger possibility of nuclear war. So what do you do now? You are stuck in the middle. You don't know what to do now. So that is very complex. So unity is at stake, European war is at stake, and even the World War III is at stake.
Thank you
Such is
so
very
much.
serious.
Thank you so much for these points. It's a really complex situation. There was a survey made in 9 EU member states: Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Romania, and Spain and Sweden, plus the UK, found support for Ukraine remained high, but those worries have shifted to the conflict's wider impacts. The survey found that despite strong support across Europe for Ukraine's bid to join the EU and the West's policy of severing ties with Moscow, many voters in Europe want this war to end as soon as possible, even if that means Ukraine losing territory. Mr. Basu, what are you saying about this?
I will like second what Dr. Singh was actually saying, that we have lost that stage. Like theoretically, we call it the ripeness stage. We have gone way past that. So just negotiation right now will be very difficult. The process, as said, that it's not that tomorrow Ukraine will get inside NATO. So what are the options here? So right now, if you see, EU itself is getting divided within the same conflict. So there are a lot of political unraveling going on right now. It is affecting the larger Asia as well. It is, for example, statements by countries like India will always have a very larger role on the entire understanding of how the Asians are understanding this conflict, the repercussions, how they are dealing with it. So it won't be a very simple process to just call it off tomorrow or like the day after tomorrow. It's not
Quite.
that easy, right?
Quite understood. Now, it's a question related to Asian continent, so it is related to both of you. Mr. Basu, staying with you, how would the Asian continent gain power, not to say profits, out of this war? Don't you think this breakthrough between the European countries over this conflict will put an end to the EU and indirectly will create a gathering of countries in Asia as well as in Africa?
Right. This is again a very important question, because I won't say that it is an end of EU. We have not, like, it's a very long shot to comment on that. But obviously, as you said, that gaining power from Asian countries, like for example, the recent change of language used by our External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. You understand the kind of language that he's using right now. He's fearless, quote unquote. He's fearless when he's saying that. He's not apologetic about using Russian oil. So it also serves a very like a positive message from Asian countries, India being like one of the largest Asian countries, still in power, obviously, that the kind of attitudinal shifts from Asia at this point of time concerning this conflict will be very interesting and it will be very different from other countries. So, but it won't affect EU as an organization right now. But obviously, there are a lot of countries who are not happy with these sanctions, because EU as a country, the countries are very different. It's not that politically and economically they are all similar. So the poorer countries will obviously face the brunt until and unless there are very clear and affordable alternatives.
Mr. Singh, coming back to you, don't you think that the impact of this European conflict between Ukraine and Russia will have its negative side even at the Asian continent? Saying so, it means between China and Taiwan and between South Korea and North Korea. Don't you think that the impact of this war will enlarge even at the Asian continent?
Yes, very true, and I agree with you what you said. Impact will be very bad. As you said, now the possibility peace dialogue between North Korea and South Korea is almost over. North Korea is emboldened by Russia's stand, against USA. So USA was putting pressure on North Korea, but somehow USA was able to get the support of Russia and China. Not anymore. So all the possibility peace talks between North and South Korea is gone. Secondly, before the war, USA was in a position to stop Chinese activity in South China Sea. Not anymore. Now China is becoming more and more bold and increasing its activities. So I think the South China is almost lost now to China. So I think as a whole, the impact of war on the eastern countries, especially in Northeast Asia or Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific, is going to be very bad. China and Russia is going to be very, very emboldened, and US is being pushed back a little bit. So I think as a whole, we see very good golden opportunity for UK, for China as well as for Russia to increase their influence on in the East Asia. So my country like India should be very worried about bad impact of this bar on balance of power in the East Asia. So I'm sitting in Seoul, so I'm very much worried about what should we do now and how can we keep the situation under control so that after the bar we are in a position to maintain a kind of peace and stability in the region. But I'm really worried about the future of this region because of this war. I think the situation is getting from bad to worse.
Perfectly understood. Now, the last point to be discussed in this debate, according to an investigation revealed on Monday by an Amnesty International, Russia's indiscriminate use of prohibited weapons such as cluster bombs has killed hundreds of civilians in the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. In its report, the organization accuses Russian troops of indiscriminately bombing residential neighborhoods of Kharkiv with rockets that by their nature have little precision to reach certain targets. Amnesty investigators found evidence of the repeated use of 9M209 and 9M235 cluster munitions, as well as dispersible mines, all of which are prohibited by international treaties.
We found that Russian forces, in their relentless shelling of Kharkiv, have carried out indiscriminate strikes that have killed hundreds of people and injured thousands. Many of these strikes were launched using cluster munitions, which are widely banned, as well as other indiscriminate weapons such as artillery shells and rockets and scatterable landmines, which are indiscriminate when used in urban areas. And such indiscriminate attacks, when they result in civilian death and injuries, as well as the destruction of civilian objects, are war crimes.
Coming back to you, Mr. Basu, do you think that Russia would be accepted inside the European Union again, or it will take time to be forgiven by the European continent? And if it won't be accepted again, and this is not likely to happen, do you think that Russia will move to consider itself as an Asian land, not a European one, taking into consideration that Russia geographically extends to the Asian continent?
Yeah, the first part of the question, no, it will take a lot of time, not in the near future, obviously, but we understand throughout history there has been shifts, there has been massive shifts, and the level of amnesia that people have is very high with respect to international politics as well. See the example of Iran as well. So the kind of relations countries has changed, the policies have changed, leadership has changed. So, but it is not going to happen in the next 5-10 years. So, there is no chance that it has any form of possibility of getting inside European Union again. But obviously, I understand the second part of the question, because geographically and larger history, Russia has. We also call it within the Eurasian politics. So obviously, but the kind of relations that European countries have had with Russia has a very strong political relation with it. So it will be tricky, but it will always depend on the leadership and the political climate of Russia at that point of time. So it will be very contextual.
Understood. Mr. Singh, same question is reversed to you. Do you think that Russia will be accepted into the European society? And do you think that Russia will come again to be extended in the Asian continent?
Basically, you should try to understand the bigger picture. This war is happening because of geopolitical reasons, Until that geopolitical reasons are not reconciled, Russia is not going to be accepted in the European Union and European continent. Because of this war is happening, because there's a serious power struggle is happening between China and USA. And bad news is that Russia is being considered as a partner of China. Until the bigger power struggle is not settled, Russia has nowhere to go. So until the bigger picture settled in the region, Russia has to stand where it stands now, being seen as a part of China. So this is a serious problem. Until the bigger power struggle is settled, or the bigger issue is not settled, geopolitical is not issue. This war is happening because of the ongoing power struggle between China and USA. Until that big issue is not settled, and China, USA, and Russia is not completely abandoned China, Russia will not be accepted in European part. So it's a clear-cut position. Either you are with us or you are not with us. So this is a clear black and white picture. So if Russia really want to go back to European Union, they have to make a very clear decision what they want to do with China. But personally, I feel currently Russia is too much dependent on China. They economically as well as militarily, they cannot abandon China at this stage, because if they abandon China, they have no guarantee how the Western Union will treat them. So I think for the time being, Russia will stay with Chinese, and this war will go on. In one way or the other, this power struggle will do countries, but keep going.
Thank you ever so much, Mr. Singh Lakvinder from South Korea. Mr. Basser from India, thank you ever so much for accepting our invitation to this show. Dear viewers, thank you so much for keeping it here on L24 News with us. For now, bye-bye.